The story begins on a quiet morning in my little countryside neighborhood, the kind of place where dew still clings to the grass, and the only sound is the creak of the old windmill beside my well. That well wasn't just a hole in the ground, it was a legacy. My grandfather dug it by hand nearly 70 years ago when this land was nothing but fields and dust. Every brick, every stone was laid with his sweat. I grew up hearing the stories, how the water never once ran dry, even through the harshest summers. When I bought this land from my father, that well became my pride. I kept it clean, maintained the pump, and even built a small wooden cover around it to protect the water. It wasn't just my water source. It was my connection to family history, something real and grounding in a world full of rules and restrictions. Then came the HOA. When I first moved into the newly organized community, the board promised structure and harmony. I signed the papers like everyone else, thinking it was just about trash pickup and lawn standards. But lately, they'd been changing, pushing boundaries, hinting at new development plans. Still, back then, I never imagined that the HOA, the people who claimed to care about property values and community pride, would one day destroy the very heart of my land, my family's well. That morning, as the sun rose over the field and glinted off the water's surface, I had no idea my peace was about to be shattered. It started small, just questions that felt harmless at first. One afternoon, the HOA president, Karen Myers, stopped by while I was tending the garden near the well. She had that fake smile plastered on her face, the kind that never reaches the eyes. "Beautiful setup you have here," she said, her tone sweet but sharp underneath. "I didn't realize you had your own water source. That's unusual for our community." Her comment made me uneasy. I told her it was an old family well, private and perfectly legal. She nodded, pretending to be impressed, but I could see her eyes scanning the pipes and the pump like she was already planning something. Before leaving, she added, "We're reviewing community resources soon. You might get a few questions about this." Over the next few weeks, things got stranger. HOA board members started showing up near my fence, pretending to inspect drainage. I saw them taking photos of the well, marking spots on clipboards. One of them even asked me if I'd ever considered sharing the water with the community park. Then came the letter, polite on the surface but filled with veiled threats. The HOA claimed my unauthorized well structure might interfere with communal development goals. They wanted me to attend the next board meeting to discuss compliance. Compliance. That word burned in my head for days. My family's well had existed long before this HOA, before any of these self-appointed rulers moved in. But I could feel it. They were circling like vultures, hiding their real intentions behind friendly smiles and paperwork. That's when I realized they didn't just want to control my well, they wanted to control me. A week after that letter, the rumble of a truck woke me before dawn. When I stepped outside, a crew of men in orange vests were already unloading tripods, measuring poles and GPS scanners right beside my fence. My heart sank, the kind of cold, heavy feeling you get when you know something bad is about to happen. I walked over and asked what they were doing. One man barely looked at me. "Just a routine property survey, ma'am," he said, jotting something down on his clipboard. "Authorized by the HOA." Authorized by the HOA. Not me, not the landowner, them. They placed red and yellow flags all over my yard, including right up to the edge of my well. When I protested, another worker handed me a folded sheet of paper. An official notice were from the HOA claiming they were verifying community boundaries for future infrastructure. It didn't specify what kind of infrastructure, and it definitely didn't mention permission. I called the HOA office immediately. Karen answered, her voice dripping with fake calm. "Oh, don't worry," she said. "It's just to ensure everything's properly documented. You'll thank us later when the property values go up." But I didn't believe her. Later that afternoon, I saw two of the surveyors whispering near my well, checking water depth and taking readings. They weren't marking land, they were assessing the water source. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch, staring at the flags fluttering in the wind, feeling like my land had been invaded. The well that had stood for generations was now part of some hidden agenda. Deep down, I knew this wasn't about documentation or boundaries. The HOA was planning something big, and my well was right in the middle of it. It was a Thursday morning, one of those quiet golden days where the air feels still and calm before everything goes wrong. I remember the smell of coffee in my kitchen and the faint hum of the old pump outside. Then came the noise, a deep mechanical growl that rattled the windows. When I stepped outside, my heart froze. 2 massive drilling trucks were parked along my fence line, their engines roaring, and a group of workers in hard hats were unloading steel pipes and hoses. Right beside them stood Karen, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, wearing that smug, managerial grin like she owned the place. I stormed over, yelling over the noise, "What the hell is going on here?" Karen turned, unfazed. "Oh, this. It's just a small improvement project. The HOA board approved a community irrigation line. It'll run right through here. Temporary inconvenience, long-term benefit." "Through here?" I shouted, pointing at the well. "That's my property." She didn't even blink. According to the updated survey, this section falls within the association's shared access boundary. "You were notified." I felt the world tilt. "That survey was illegal," I snapped. "You never had my permission." But the workers kept going, the drills screeching into the earth. Each metallic whine felt like a punch to my chest. Dirt flew everywhere as they began boring just feet from my well, the ground trembling beneath my boots. I tried to stand in their way, but one of the contractors calmly said, "Ma'am, please step back. We're following HOA orders." Orders. Like my land was just another checkbox on their list. By noon, half my yard was torn up. The once clear water from my well had turned cloudy, bubbling with silt from the vibrations. I begged them to stop, called the county, called the police. But no one wanted to interfere with HOA property matters. I stood there, helpless, as the machine roared louder. My grandfather's legacy, my family's lifeline, was being torn apart right before my eyes. And all I could do was watch. That was the day I realized the HOA wasn't just meddling anymore. They had declared war. By the next morning, the damage was undeniable. The soil around my well looked bruised, cracked, sunken, unstable. The drilling trucks were gone, but the ground still trembled faintly, like the earth itself hadn't settled after being torn open. I stood there staring at it, clutching a mug of cold coffee, praying it was just surface damage. But deep down, I knew the truth. When I tried to draw water, the pump groaned like a wounded animal. The handle jerked, then froze. I pulled again. Nothing but a hollow, choking sound from below. My stomach turned cold. I ran to the edge of the well and peered inside. What I saw made my knees buckle. The inner walls had caved in. Bricks that had stood for 70 years now hung jagged and broken. The water was gone, replaced by muddy sludge and floating debris. My reflection wavered on the murky surface for a moment, before vanishing completely, swallowed by the mud. A wave of helpless anger hit me. I shouted, cursed, even threw a rock into the pit just to hear the empty splash. That sound, dull and distant, echoed like the end of something sacred. When I called the HOA office, Karen's assistant answered with that usual rehearsed tone. I explained what had happened, voice trembling. "Your drilling destroyed my well," I said. There was a pause. Then she said calmly, "Ma'am, according to our records, that well was non-compliant with safety codes. The HOA cannot be held responsible for structural failures on private property." Structural failure, that's what they called it. They didn't just destroy my well, they erased responsibility with a line of legal jargon. As I hung up, I felt a kind of silence fall over my property. Not peaceful silence, but hollow, heavy, like something living had been buried. My grandfather's work, my water, my independence, gone. I remember sitting by the ruined well until sunset, the air thick with dust and the faint smell of oil. The sound of drilling had stopped, but in my mind, it still echoed. The mechanical scream that marked the death of my family's legacy. That was the night I swore I wouldn't let this go. Not this time. Not ever. By Monday morning, I had gathered every photo, every note, and every piece of evidence I could find. The survey maps, the drilling permits, the cracked stones from my well. I walked straight into the HOA office, my boots still caked with the mud from my destroyed yard. The place smelled like air freshener and fake professionalism. Behind the desk sat Karen Myers, tapping her manicured nails on a stack of papers like she'd been expecting me. "Karen," I said, slamming the folder onto her desk, "your crew destroyed my well. I want to know what you're going to do about it." She didn't even flinch. "Good morning to you, too," she said smoothly, flipping through her calendar as if I were complaining about a broken mailbox. "Now, regarding your well, the board has reviewed the situation, and according to our compliance department, the structure wasn't properly registered." I stared at her, disbelief turning into fury. "Registered? My family built that well before this HOA even existed. It's on my deed, on my title. You people had no right to touch it." Karen looked up, finally meeting my eyes, her expression perfectly calm. The kind of calm only people with no conscience have. "We understand your frustration," she said in that cold, rehearsed tone. "However, our improvement project was conducted within approved boundaries. The collapse of your structure is unfortunate, but unrelated." Unrelated. The word stung worse than any insult. "So that's it?" I said. "You destroy my well, ruin my property, and just shrug it off?" Her smile tightened. "I would advise you not to make accusations, Mr." She paused, pretending to check my file. "Mr. Daniels, you wouldn't want to create hostility with your neighbors. That never ends well." It wasn't just arrogance in her tone. It was a threat. I left that office shaking, my hands clenched so tight I could feel my nails cut into my palms. They weren't going to help me. They weren't even going to acknowledge what they'd done. To them, I was just another homeowner who dared to stand up to their little kingdom. That night, as I sat by the ruins of my well under the moonlight, I realized something. They wanted me to give up. They wanted me to feel powerless. But they'd made one mistake. They'd picked the wrong person to bury. The next morning, I woke up with a purpose burning in my chest. If the HOA thought I'd roll over and accept their lies, they didn't know who they were dealing with. I made 3 phone calls before noon, one to a property lawyer, one to a hydrologist, and one to the county zoning office. If I couldn't get justice from the HOA, I'd drag the truth into the light myself. The lawyer, Ellen Carver, was direct and sharp, the kind of woman who didn't waste time on small talk. After I told her what happened, she said, "If your well was on private land and they damaged it without consent, that's trespassing and destruction of property. But we'll need proof, records, permits, anything." That's when the digging, the real digging, began. The hydrologist I hired came out that same week. He examined the site carefully, lowering instruments into what was left of the shaft. When he came back up, his expression was grim. "They disrupted the aquifer flow," he said. "The pressure's redirected. Someone was tapping into your water line." I froze. "Tapping into it? Where?" He pointed toward the new landscaped area at the edge of the neighborhood, the one with the decorative fountain the HOA had been bragging about in their newsletters. "If I had to guess, there's your answer." I drove there that afternoon, my heart pounding. Sure enough, the fountain was newly finished, water gushing beautifully under a shiny brass plaque that read, "Dedicated to Community Unity, HOA Board Project 2025. Unity. My jaw tightened. That fountain's water was crystal clear, too clear. It was the same groundwater my family's well once drew from. They hadn't just destroyed my well by accident. They'd stolen the water beneath it to make a vanity project they could brag about in their meetings. When I told Ellen, she went silent for a moment, then said, "Get everything in writing. Photos, documents, the survey, the drilling orders. We're going to expose them." That night, I spread every paper I had across my dining table, maps, letters, receipts, and something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about a well anymore. It was about power, corruption, and how far the HOA would go to control what didn't belong to them. I wasn't just a homeowner now. I was an investigator, and I was done playing by their rules. It didn't take long for the HOA to realize I was digging into their mess. Within days, the atmosphere in the neighborhood changed. Quiet waves of gossip began to ripple through the streets. People who once smiled and waved now crossed the road when they saw me coming. Conversations stopped the moment I approached. It was like I had suddenly become the villain of my own community. The first sign came from my next-door neighbor, Jim, a good man I'd known for years. One morning, he looked uneasy when I greeted him. "Hey, he said, scratching his neck. "Karen mentioned you're trying to sue the HOA? Something about stealing water?" He said it like he didn't believe it himself. "She's lying, Jim," I said. "They destroyed my well and redirected my water to that new fountain. I have proof." He frowned, shifting his weight. "Karen said your well was contaminated, man. She said the HOA was fixing a safety issue for everyone's benefit." Contaminated. That was their angle. The HOA was spreading rumors that my well, my clean, legal, perfectly maintained well, had been a health hazard. And now, apparently, I was trying to profit from suing the HOA for doing the right thing. By the end of the week, I started finding anonymous notes taped to my fence. "Stop stirring up trouble. You're hurting property values. Move out if you can't live by the rules." At the next HOA meeting, Karen made sure to twist the knife. In front of a packed room of homeowners, she put on her best fake empathy voice and said, "It's unfortunate that some individuals are spreading false accusations about our community projects. The fountain was built for everyone's enjoyment, not for personal gain." Every pair of eyes turned toward me. I could feel the judgment in the air, that toxic mix of fear and conformity. They didn't want to believe their precious HOA could do something wrong. It was easier to blame me, the troublemaker, than to face the truth. But the more they whispered, the stronger my resolve grew. I didn't care if they thought I was crazy. I didn't care if I stood alone. Because behind all their lies and smiles, I had something they didn't. Evidence. They could twist my reputation all they wanted. But soon, everyone was going to see who the real villain was. By the time the next HOA town meeting rolled around, I was ready. I'd spent weeks gathering everything: documents from the county water office, copies of the illegal survey permits, the hydrologist's report, and even photographs of the drilling site before and after my well collapsed. Every lie the HOA had told was about to come crashing down on them. The meeting hall was packed that evening. Neighbors filling every chair, the air buzzing with tension and curiosity. At the front sat the board, all polished smiles and fake professionalism. Karen sat in the middle, wearing her signature red blazer, radiating smug confidence like she'd already won. When the public comment portion began, I stood up. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. "My name is Daniel Reed," I said, "and I'm here to show you what the HOA has really been doing with our money and our land." Karen immediately interrupted, her tone sharp. "Mr. Reed, this is not the time or place for personal grievances." I slammed the folder down on the table, hard enough to make her flinch. "Then you better make time," I said. I began laying out the evidence for everyone to see. Photos of the drilling machines in my yard signed HOA work orders for the community irrigation project. And finally, the hydrologist's report confirming that the new fountain was directly connected to my well's water source. Gasps filled the room. "Here," I said, holding up a document, "is the permit showing my land boundaries. And here's your survey. The one you falsified to claim my property was shared access. You destroyed my family's well to feed a fountain you could brag about." Karen's face went pale. She tried to recover, stammering, That's a gross misinterpretation." But I wasn't finished. I pulled up a final document, a chain of emails I'd received anonymously, showing that the HOA board had voted to use the nearest viable groundwater source to supply the fountain, knowing full well it was on private property. The room erupted. Neighbors stood, shouting questions, demanding answers. Even the board members beside Karen started whispering furiously among themselves. Someone yelled, "You knew about this?" Another shouted, "You stole his water." Karen tried to regain control, but the crowd was done listening. Her power, built on lies and intimidation, was crumbling right there in front of everyone. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Justice. I didn't need to raise my voice anymore. The truth was finally speaking for itself. The fallout was immediate. Within a week of the meeting, the neighborhood that once looked at me with suspicion was suddenly on my side. People stopped me on the street to apologize. Some embarrassed, others angry at themselves for believing Karen's lies. The HOA office that once buzzed with arrogance was now silent, its blinds closed and its inbox overflowing with complaints. My lawyer, Ellen, moved fast. She filed an official lawsuit for property destruction, illegal use of private resources, and falsification of survey records. The evidence I'd presented at the meeting made the case airtight. The county got involved next, launching their own investigation into how the HOA had obtained construction permits in the first place. When the results came out, it was everything I'd suspected, and worse. Karen and 2 other board members had knowingly approved the drilling project using falsified boundary data and had redirected my water line to the new fountain without any authorization. The board was dissolved within a month, and Karen was banned from serving on any community association in the state. The court ruled in my favor. The HOA was ordered to pay full damages, enough to restore my well, compensate for the lost water supply, and cover all legal costs. But even after all that, I didn't feel truly satisfied until the day the new crew arrived. This time, they weren't HOA contractors. They were my people, engineers I hired myself. As the drilling rig started, I stood there watching, feeling the same morning sun that once witnessed the destruction of my old well. Only now, it was different. The sound of machinery no longer filled me with anger. It filled me with renewal. When the new well finally struck water, a clear stream burst upward, glinting in the light. I smiled for the first time in months. This wasn't just about getting water back. It was about reclaiming everything they tried to take: my land, my peace, and my voice. In the months that followed, the HOA restructured. The new members, mostly neighbors who'd stood up during the scandal, asked me to join the board, to help rebuild trust and fairness in the community. At first, I laughed. Me, sitting on that cursed board? But then I realized, maybe that was the point. So I accepted. Not for power, not for revenge, but to make sure no one ever went through what I did. Now, when I walk past that new fountain, I don't feel anger anymore. I just smile, knowing it runs dry half the time, because I had the new plumbing rerouted to be fully independent of my water source. Justice, I learned, isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, like the steady sound of water flowing from a well you fought to protect.